The morning light crept through the evergreens of Cascade Ridge, Oregon, painting the mist in shades of silver. It was May 19th, 1996. The kind of morning that made you forget evil could ever exist in a place so breathtaking. Clara Jennings, 24, adjusted the straps on her weathered backpack, the corners of her map flapping in the wind. She was practical, thoughtful, the kind of woman who color-coded her gear and made checklist for checklist. Standing beside her, Leah Porter, 26, brimmed with restless energy, bouncing on her toes like she couldn't wait another second to start the hike. Between them trotted Milo, a golden retriever whose tail wagged like a metronome of pure joy. Ready? Leah grinned. Clara smiled softly. I've been ready since February. They laughed. The easy kind of laugh to share between two people who'd found in each other what they didn't know they'd been missing. For the past 18 months, Clara and Leah had built their lives around a simple truth. They were happiest when the world felt far away. Clara worked as an environmental analyst in Portland. Leah was an outdoor educator teaching inner-city kids how to find peace in the wilderness. Nature wasn't just a passion for them. It was therapy, escape, home, their destination. Cascade Ridge National Park, a massive stretch of rugged beauty that drew thousands every year. Their plan, a 7-day trek to the backcountry, ending at Mirror Lake, a secluded spot known among hikers for its untouched serenity. Clara loaded the last pack into her old red Subaru, the backseat mosaic of gear, tents, maps, trail mix, instant coffee. Leah checked the list again, though she already knew it by heart. Sleeping bags? Packed. Water filter? Twice. Chocolate? Leah smirked. You doubt me? The laughter returned, echoing down the driveway as they set off. The drive wound through pine forests and narrow mountain roads. They sang along to old Fleetwood Mac songs and argued playfully over whether the universe was random or meant to be. Clara, ever the realist, believed in science and planning. Leah believed in signs, in things that happened because they were supposed to. Neither could have imagined how cruelly fate would test those beliefs. They reached Cascade Ridge Trailhead just after noon. The park ranger waved them through, reminding them to check in before sunset. Storms coming midweek, he warned. Stay close to marked trails. Clara nodded politely, her usual calm composure hiding the small thrill of adventure that pulsed beneath the surface. Leah, meanwhile, barely listened. Her eyes were already on the trail, disappearing into the trees. The air was crisp, alive with the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was the kind of day hikers dream about. Clear skies, warm sunlight, an illusion that nothing bad could ever happen beneath a sky that blue. They set up their first camp near Echo Falls, a gentle cascade that caught the light like glass. Clara pitched the tent with quiet precision, while Leah gathered firewood, humming off-key. Milo trotted between them, carrying sticks too big for his mouth. As the sun dipped behind the ridges, the forest fell into a serene hush. The fire crackled. Steam rose from a pot of instant noodles. Leah wrote in her journal, while Clara, ever meticulous, labeled a roll of undeveloped film. Cascade Ridge, Day 1. I wish we could stay out here forever, Leah whispered. Forever's a long time, Clara replied, smiling faintly. Leah leaned closer. Not long enough. Milo sighed and laid his head across Clara's knee. The fire flickered, sending shadows up the walls of the tent like whispers of the trees outside. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a sound, faint but deliberate, broke the stillness. A branch snapping. Leah paused mid-sentence. Did you hear that? Clara listened. Nothing but the wind. Probably just an animal, she said softly. They didn't know it then, but something was already watching them. Something human. Something patient. And for the next 7 days, it would follow them. By the third day on the trail, Clara and Leah had disappeared completely into the wilderness. The deeper they hiked, the less the outside world seemed to matter. No phones, no noise, just the rhythm of footsteps, the rustle of wind, and Milo's cheerful panting as he led the way. They met a few other hikers. A couple from Seattle, an older man with a weathered backpack who nodded politely. But most of the time, it was just the three of them. The kind of quiet that city people dream about. The kind of peace that makes you forget that danger can walk on two legs. That afternoon, they stopped near a ridge overlooking Pine Hollow Valley. Leah, as always, took in the view like she was seeing the world for the first time. Clara took a photo. "One for the wall," she said. "Assuming we ever go back," Leah teased. They laughed, their voices carried off by the wind. The last time anyone would ever hear them laugh. 3 days later, when Clara's parents didn't get her usual check-in call, they didn't panic right away. She was cautious, reliable, but also known to lose herself in nature. Maybe the radio was out of range. Maybe they decided to stay an extra day. But by May 30th, the silence became unbearable. "Clara never misses a call," her father, James Jennings, told the police over the phone. "Not once. Not in 10 years of hiking." The ranger station at Cascade Ridge logged their entry permit, but no record of their exit. The weather had turned. Storms sweeping across the mountains, rain washing away trails and tracks. Still, within hours, rescue teams were mobilized. The first sign came not from people, but from a dog. Late that afternoon, a couple hiking near the trailhead spotted a golden retriever, alone, muddy, trembling. His tag read Milo. The hikers recognized the name from flyers already posted around the area. They called it in immediately. When rescuers found Milo, he was pacing frantically in circles, whining at anyone who tried to comfort him. His paws were bleeding. He kept glancing toward the woods, like he was waiting for someone to follow. That night, under the yellow glare of the ranger station lights, Milo refused food. He simply sat facing the dark window, eyes locked on the direction of the forest. Everyone knew then, something terrible had happened. Search crews spread out at dawn. Rangers, state police, volunteers. Dozens of people combing the rain-soaked forest. Helicopters hovered above the valleys. For 2 days, nothing. No sign of gear. No tent. No footprints. On the morning of June 1st, 1996, a searcher named David Pollard, working with Cadaver Dog, caught the faintest scent of decomposition near a steep ravine, about half a mile from an unmarked connector trail. The forest was silent, except for the wind through the pines. "Over here," he called softly. What they found next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 2 bodies, partially concealed under branches, and camping gear. The tent was collapsed nearby. 1 sleeping bag half-zipped, a pot of oatmeal overturned. Both women were bound wrists and ankles, with rope cut from their own equipment. Their mouths were gagged. The scene was chaotic yet methodical, the kind of violence that suggested planning, not impulse. Milo had been right there. He'd seen everything. The lead investigator, Detective Alan Mercer, stood for a long time in silence, the sound of distant thunder rolling across the ridge. He'd seen plenty of crime scenes, but not like this, not in a place meant for peace. When the bodies were finally identified as Clara Jennings and Leah Porter, the news hit Oregon like an earthquake. The media swarmed Cascade Ridge. 2 women found murdered in National Park. The headlines read, "Bound, gagged, and killed in paradise." For Clara's parents, the call came just past midnight. Mr. Jennings' voice broke when he heard the words. "No, she just wanted a week in the woods," he whispered. "That's all. Just a week." Leah's mother, calling from Maine, couldn't even speak. The phone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a hollow sound that seemed to echo forever. Investigators began piecing together the fragments. They found the women's camera, half buried in dirt. The last photo showing Leah sitting on a boulder, smiling at the horizon. The timestamp read May 21st, 5:42 p.m. That image would later appear on every missing person poster, every news broadcast, every courtroom slideshow. The crime scene told a story, but only in whispers. The tent ropes used as restraints. The torn map with Mirror Lake circled in red. The untouched cash and jewelry. This wasn't a robbery. It was something personal. Something cruel. Within days, the FBI joined the investigation, taking over what was now officially classified as a double homicide. The working theory spread like wildfire. A hate crime, a drifter, a hunter-turned-predator. The public wanted answers. The families wanted closure. But nature had erased too many clues. Rain, wind, time. By the second week, Detective Mercer admitted what no one wanted to hear. We may never find who did this, but someone out there knew. Someone had walked out of that forest alive. And for the next 28 years, that person would live free until the woods finally gave up their secret. Detective Alan Mercer had worked homicides for 16 years, but something about the Cascade Ridge murders gnawed at him. He'd seen senseless violence before, bar fights gone wrong, domestic disputes that turned fatal, but this was different. This was planned. Whoever did it had stalked the women, tied them up, took their time. The brutality didn't match the quiet serenity of Cascade Ridge. You don't hike 7 miles into the woods for random murder, Mercer said. You go there for a reason. By mid-June 1996, the investigation had swelled to include the Oregon State Police and the FBI. Teams of forensic experts combed through every inch of the site. They found torn tent fabric, a shoe print half swallowed by mud, cigarette butts, and a fragment of rope cut clean with a hunting knife. Every item was cataloged, photographed, and sealed in evidence bags. The problem wasn't a lack of evidence. It was the lack of technology. DNA testing in the 90s was slow, crude, and incomplete. Mercer's got told him the answers were already in those samples, but the science wasn't ready yet. Meanwhile, the town of Summit Falls, just 20 miles from the park, was unraveling. Reporters swarmed. Families canceled camping trips. And beneath the grief, whispers started, ugly ones. 2 women camping alone? What did they expect? It had to be some drifter, or one of those weirdos who hang around the trails. Within weeks, the press twisted the story. Instead of 2 young women murdered in cold blood, Clara and Leah became 2 lovers on a dangerous adventure. The implication was cruel, that somehow they'd invited danger. Mercer hated that narrative. They weren't reckless, he told a local station. They were careful, smart. They just ran into evil. The first major lead came in August 1996, when hikers reported seeing a man camping alone near the same ridge days before the murders. Travis Red, 42, a transit handyman with a record for assault, was brought in. He denied knowing anything but couldn't explain scratches on his arms. Detectives leaned on him for hours. Nothing broke. Then, in the fall of that year, an anonymous tip suggested the killer might have been a ranger, someone who knew the park's terrain too well. The rumor caught fire but led nowhere. No ranger matched the profile. The investigation stalled. By 1998, the case had officially gone cold. The boxes of evidence, fibers, hair, photographs, were sealed and stored in the basement of the Cascade County Sheriff's Department. The families, desperate for answers, attended every press conference until there were no more to attend. But Mercer never let it go. On his desk sat 2 Polaroids, one of Clara and Leah smiling on a cliffside, and another of Milo, their golden retriever, found shivering near the ranger station. He called them his reminders. Every time I thought about quitting, he'd later say, I'd look at their faces, and I'd think, not yet. Then in 2001, the case flickered back to life. A man named Daryl Rice, arrested for an attempted abduction in another Oregon park, mentioned Cascade Ridge during interrogation. When detectives dug deeper, they found Rice had been camping within 10 miles of the Jennings Porter site in 1996. He had prior charges for harassment, carried a knife, and bragged about scaring women on the trail. It seemed like the break they'd been waiting for. By 2002, Rice was indicted for the murders. Prosecutors built their case on circumstantial evidence, his violent history, his proximity, his weapon. The story fit too neatly. Families rejoiced. After 6 years, they thought justice was finally coming. But then came the lab results. The DNA pulled from Clara's clothing, the hair fibers, the cigarette butts. None of it matched Rice. Not a single trace. Mercer sat in the back of the courtroom when the charges were dropped in 2004. Rice smirked as he walked out free. Outside, reporters asked if he had anything to say. He spat on the ground and muttered, "Guess I'm not your monster." For the families, it was a second death. For Mercer, it was a personal failure. He boxed up the evidence himself that night, placing his badge on top before sealing it shut. "We'll find him," he said quietly, "even if it takes the rest of my life." And it almost did, because the truth wouldn't surface until science and time finally caught up with the past. 2 decades had passed since the murders at Cascade Ridge, but for Detective Alan Mercer, time never dulled the ache. Even after retirement, he still carried the case file in a faded leather briefcase. Every photograph, every report, every failure pressed between pages like dried leaves. He'd promised the families he wouldn't quit, but the years had made that promise feel heavier. Then, in 2021, something happened that would change everything. A new detective, Laura Jenkins, joined the Oregon Cold Case Division. Young, sharp, with the kind of determination Mercer used to have before the years carved it out of him. While reviewing unsolved homicides from the 1990s, she stumbled on a Cascade Ridge file. 2 women murdered in a national park. No robbery. Dog survived. She looked up from the paperwork. Why wasn't this solved? Mercer, now gray and tired but still consulting, gave a thin smile. Because back then, science couldn't keep up with monsters. Laura reopened the evidence boxes. Sealed since 2004, their labels yellow with time. Inside were the relics of nightmare. Rope fibers, tent fabric, swabs sealed in brittle tape, and Polaroids that smell faintly of pine and rain. Every item went to the State Forensic Lab in Salem, where technicians prepared to use DNA technology that hadn't existed 25 years earlier. For months, the lab buzzed with cautious hope. They had to work carefully. Samples that old were fragile, easily destroyed. But with modern techniques, even a single degraded cell could tell a story. By autumn, the results began trickling in. The DNA extracted from a rope and fabric did not match any of the earlier suspects. Not Daryl Rice. Not Travis Redd, not any of the men who'd once filled Mercer's suspect board. Instead, the profile matched someone entirely new. A hit appeared in the national database. Walter Walt Jennings, a convicted sex offender from Ohio with a long history of violence against women. Laura froze when she saw the date. Walt had been in Oregon in May of 1996. His employment records placed him working seasonal construction near Cascade Ridge that spring. And then, like a ghost, he'd vanished, moving from state to state under aliases, arrested twice for assault, and eventually incarcerated for another attack in 2003. There was only one problem. Walter Jennings had died in prison in 2018, the day Laura confirmed the match. She drove to Mercer's house with tears in her eyes. He opened the door before she could knock. "You found him, didn't you?" She nodded. "We did, but he's gone." For a long time, the old detective didn't speak. He just sat at his kitchen table, the afternoon light cutting across stacks of old case notes. Finally, he whispered, "So that's it, 28 years. And he dies before we can even ask him why." The following months were a blur of verification and paperwork. Laura's team retested every sample, every fiber. The results came back the same, over and over. Walter Jennings was a man who murdered Clara Jennings and Leah Porter at Cascade Ridge in 1996. The truth had finally surfaced, buried under decades of dust, resurrected by science. When the announcement came in June 2024, it made national news. The headlines read, "Cold case solved after 28 years. DNA identifies Cascade Ridge killer." Reporters flooded Summit Falls again, but this time the tone was different. Not scandal. Not speculation. Closure. Laura Jenkins stood at the press conference podium, flanked by Mercer and state officials. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Through modern forensic science, we have identified the man responsible for the 1996 murders of Clara Jennings and Leah Porter. Though he cannot face trial, we can finally say their story has been heard, and their killer has not escaped the truth." Behind her, photographs of Clara and Leah glowed on the screen. 2 young women forever smiling at the world that had taken them too soon. When Mercer visited Clara's mother to deliver the official report, she opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes were softer now, though rimmed with years of grief. "I always knew you'd come back," she said quietly. He handed her the file, thick, worn, but finally complete. "I'm sorry," Mercer said, voice breaking. "We found him, but he's gone." She looked at the file for a long time, then smiled faintly. Maybe that's enough, she whispered. Maybe knowing is the justice we get. That night, Mercer drove up to Cascade Ridge one last time. The forest was quiet, blanketed in snow. The same trees still stood, the same trails winded down toward the ravine where he'd once found 2 lifeless bodies. He set down 2 wildflowers, one for each of them. "You're home now," he said softly. Above him, the wind whispered through the pines, not with menace this time, but with peace. The woods had kept their secret for 28 years. Now, at last, they had told the truth. When the news broke across America in the summer of 2024, it didn't sound like justice. It sounded like a ghost finally learning how to speak. DNA reveals the Cascade Ridge killer after 28 years. That headline spread across every major network, every podcast, every feed. But for those who had lived inside that silence, the families, the detectives, the volunteers who once combed the woods, it wasn't just news. It was an exhale they'd been holding for nearly 3 decades. Elaine Jennings sat alone at her kitchen table, in the same small Oregon house where her daughter once practiced piano. The air smelled faintly of dust and old sheet music. She turned the first page of the report, her hands trembling. There was the name of the man who'd haunted her dreams for half her life, Walter Jennings. A stranger, a monster. The name meant nothing and everything at once. "Finally," she whispered, but it didn't sound like relief. Her husband had died years ago, never knowing. Now she would have to carry both the truth and the loneliness of it. That same evening, across the country, Margaret Porter, Leah's mother, received the same phone call. The 2 women hadn't spoken in years. Grief had split them in different directions. But when Elaine dialed her number that night, the moment she heard Margaret's voice, time folded in on itself. "They found him," Elaine said softly. There was a pause, then a long, shaking breath. "Is he still alive?" Margaret asked. "No, he died in prison 5 years ago." Margaret exhaled slowly. "Then maybe that's our justice," she said. "He escaped the courtroom, but not the truth." The following week, the FBI held a press conference in Portland. It was gray and cold, the kind of weather where even good news fell heavy. Behind the podium were 2 photographs projected on a large screen. Clara Jennings and Leah Porter, smiling against the green sweep of Cascade Ridge. Special Agent Laura Jenkins stood before the cameras, the official case file clutched in her hands. "Through modern DNA and forensic genealogy," she began, "we have identified the man responsible for the 1996 Cascade Ridge murders. His name was Walter Jennings, a convicted rapist who lived between Oregon and Ohio. He died in prison in 2018. He will never stand trial, but he will never again be unknown." Reporters shouted over each other. Was this a hate crime? How many other victims? Why did it take so long? Laura looked down at the file, then back up. "There are questions we may never answer," she said quietly. But for Clara and Leah, the silence has ended. In Summit Falls, where the women were last seen alive, flowers began appearing along the trailhead. Someone left a framed photo of the 2 of them with their golden retriever, Milo, between them. Beneath it, a handwritten note read, "You can rest now. The woods remember you." By the weekend, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil. Locals, hikers, members of the LGBTQ+ community, even strangers who had followed the case for years. The soft glow of candles reflected off the lake, and the forest seemed to listen. Retired Detective Alan Mercer stood in the back, hat in hand. When a reporter asked him what justice meant now, he said simply, "Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's the truth, and the truth finally caught up." People also remembered Milo, the golden retriever who had survived. In 1996, he had been found wandering alone, exhausted but alive. Clara's brother had taken him in, and for the next 7 years, Milo lived quietly, never barking again. He'd just stare out the window, the brother recalled in a 2005 interview, always toward the woods, like he was waiting for them. In 2025, a local hiking group raised funds for a bronze statue of Milo near the park entrance. The plaque beneath it reads, "For those who wait for justice, and for those who never stop searching." The Cascade Ridge case changed everything. Within months of its closure, Oregon approved new funding for forensic testing. Other states followed. Cold cases long buried in dust began to reopen. Agent Laura Jenkins became a national voice for forensic reform. When asked what drove her, she always gave the same answer. Because they were forgotten, and that's not acceptable. She kept a single photo on her desk, Clara and Leah, smiling in the wild, full of life. She said it reminded her that every statistic had a heartbeat. As for Alan Mercer, the man who had carried the case for half his life, he finally retired for good. On the last page of his old case notebook, written in shaky pen strokes, were the final words he ever logged. Case closed. The forest gave them back. Each May, when spring returned to the Cascades, people gathered at the trailhead to remember. They bring flowers. They walk the same path Clara and Leah once walked. When the sun dips behind the ridgeline and the woods fall silent, the wind moves through the trees. Not as a warning this time, but as a promise. Justice came late, but it came. And truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always finds its way home. Years passed, but the story of Cascade Ridge never faded. It lived on, not just as a headline, but as a quiet, enduring reminder of what truth can become when people refuse to stop looking. In classrooms across Oregon, forensic students studied the case as a lesson in persistence. Investigators across the country cited it when pushing for expanded DNA databases. And hikers who walked the ridge trails each spring found new plaques nailed to wooden posts, engraved with 6 simple words. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Elaine Jennings, now in her late 70s, kept her daughter's photo on the mantle. Sometimes she'd whisper to it, updates about the garden, the neighbors, the changing seasons. But mostly, she'd just sit in silence, listening to the same wind that once blew through the Cascade trees. Your story helped others, she would say softly. You mattered. You still do. In Maine, Margaret Porter organized annual wilderness scholarships under Leah's name, grants for young women studying environmental science and outdoor safety. Each spring, she'd write a letter to the new recipients, ending every note the same way. Go where the trees are tall and the air is clear. Walk the trails for those who can't. The Cascade Ridge case changed law enforcement forever. After the FBI confirmed Walter Jennings as the killer, federal policy shifted, prioritizing forensic genealogy for all unsolved violent crimes. States began clearing out backlogged evidence, and one by one, old cases began to thaw. Special Agent Laura Jenkins became one of the leading voices in this movement. She spoke at universities, conferences, and crime labs across the country, always telling the same story. Science didn't solve this case. People did. People who care enough to keep the evidence safe, to push when others said stop. The technology only gave their hope a second chance. And when reporters asked her if solving Cascade Ridge felt like victory, she'd smile faintly and shake her head. It's not victory, she'd say. It's closure, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. On a cold afternoon in May 2026, 30 years after the murders, a crowd gathered at the Cascade Ridge trailhead. Snow still lingered in the shadows of the pines. A memorial stone stood beneath the tallest tree, engraved with 2 names, Clara Jennings and Leah Porter, 1972 to 1996. Beneath their names, a single line read, "They loved the wild," and it remembered. Alan Mercer was there too, older now, slower, but still walking the trail one step at a time. When he reached the stone, he placed a folded note beside the flowers and whispered, "Rest easy, girls. We finally caught him." Then he turned back down the mountain, the sound of the wind carrying through the pines, soft, steady, like a heartbeat. For everyone who had followed the case, Cascade Ridge became more than a murder story. It became a symbol of endurance, of truth, of love that doesn't die even when people do. Students visited the site every year. Hikers left letters, sometimes confessions of their own losses. And somewhere in those woods, where the trails twist and fade into silence, 2 souls were finally at peace. Because time may bury evidence, but it cannot bury memory. Because truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home.